Welcome back. Happy New Year. A few years back in 2022, I participated in Jamuary. Now, if you're not familiar with Jamuary, it's one of these monthly creative challenges where every day of the month you're tasked with creating something. And as the name might imply, for Jamuary, every day you record a little jam. There are lots of versions of this. Previously, I'd participated in February album writing month for a couple years in a row, and participated is probably a very generous term for what I did. Back then, 2010, 2011, I basically just was in my dorm recording a demo every 2 days or so, and those never really got released or anything or further developed. Fast forward to 2022, and I took Jamuary a lot more seriously. I posted a new video to Instagram every day for that entire month. Not every video featured a brand new composition. There were maybe 2 or 3 that had previously been written, but I had never released them in an album or anything like that. So here we are, January 1st of 2025, and you might be asking, are you going to participate in Jamuary again? And the answer is no. I'm really grateful that my life at that time was able to accommodate that type of creative schedule, but right now that's not the case. But still, I wanted to take a moment to look back at what I created during that process and talk about whether at the end of a creative monthly challenge like this, you walk away with finished work or not. Now, this is going to be largely based on my own experience, but there are lots of people who have participated in these types of things, and I think each person's experience is going to be different. But I do think there are some broadly applicable themes, whether you're doing Jamuary, February album writing month, National Novel Writing Month, which is in November, or National Poetry Writing Month, which is in April, whether you're doing Inktober, or Zinetober, or Anytober, or there's the one that's coming up on February 1st, Hourly Comic Day. All of these timed creative challenges are meant to impose a artificial deadline to encourage creators to hunker down and make something. At the end of the day, I think that that's a good thing. I'm the type of person who needs deadlines. Sometimes there are natural deadlines or professional deadlines, but sometimes artificial deadlines can work just as well. So, looking back on the 31 tracks that I made in January, there's a few different ways that you can break up these tracks. Now, for the past 10 years, I've been working in music licensing on the technical side and have spent a lot of time inside of spreadsheets managing metadata for production music and artist tracks. So naturally, the first thing I did with these tracks was throw them into a table and see if I could sort through the data that way. I first identified the style of the track or the genre, and then some qualitative keywords or moods. And then I thought it'd be interesting to look at which instruments I gravitated towards for these tracks, the general length of each track. And then now, with a few years of hindsight, I'm looking at these tracks and thinking, how could I group these together into meaningful releases? Now, that's not always my typical process when putting together a release. Sometimes it is a sort of compilation of tracks that fit inside of a theme or a mood over a long period of time, and once put together, they sort of meld and feel cohesive. Other times, they're tracks that are written back to back or in a short period of time or following the same sort of creative direction or brief. In this instance, it's sort of a combination of both. I definitely didn't have a brief going into each day where I was trying to achieve a certain thing, but given that each of these tracks was written in the same month, they all share a lot of DNA. I was leaning heavy on certain pieces of gear, and that really carried the tones in certain places. So looking back at it a little more objectively now, I think the tracks can be packaged up pretty tidily into 4 different releases. The first would be a short little 6-track ambient EP. While there would be some mood shifts on this EP, moving from a more reflective and warm to a more mysterious or moody, I think it's still a pretty nice vibe from start to finish. The next would be a 6-track EP that's more electronic. Now, I've released a sort of electroacoustic album made in collaboration with a partner, Boaz Walker, that we released under the artist name Drives. And truthfully, I could hand off these 6 tracks to him and see what he adds to it. And after that, I think these tracks could make it onto a Drives release. They're all roughly in the same pocket, kind of moody or cool, maybe a little gritty or reflective. The next collection is a little bit more eclectic. A lot of these tracks feature guitar, but it sort of ranges from folky to krautrock to retro slow dances. You've got sort of R&B and neo soul. It's really all over the place. So while I'm not sure if I would release this one as its own standalone EP, I do think that these tracks could be reworked or maybe even split out and expanded on, added to with other tracks, and made into even more EPs. And then the last group is sort of categorized by being keyboard driven. It's sort of an EP that's almost neoclassical, still pretty indie and mixing up electronic and ambient and other elements. But yeah, they all sort of center around keyboard melodies or keyboard harmonies, whether that's the keyboard of a synthesizer or a Rhodes or a piano, all sorts of different things. Now, my main musical project for the past few years has been very keyboard driven. It's called Tumsun, and it's a neoclassical sort of project that incorporates pianos and strings and electronics and things like that. So I could see a lot of these tracks being developed, expanded, rearranged, and either added to a future Tumsun release or as a standalone Tumsun release. So those are the 4 EPs that I sort of came away with after Jamuary 2022. And you might be asking, it's 2025. Why haven't you put those out yet? Why have you been sitting on them for several years? And that's a good question. In the end, a lot of it was because of my release schedule. I actually was sitting on a Tumsun release during January of 2022. I was finishing it up then. That was my first release under that artist name. I released it on White Lab Rex out of the UK, and I was really proud of that one. So, I really wanted that release to shine. I didn't want to undercut myself with a lot of other smaller releases. Now, my Drives collaboration, our last release was back in 2018, and that was actually right before I moved away from my collaborator. So yeah, that's definitely one that I would love to sort of get back in his hands and get out and get released. Now the ambient EP, that's one that I would also like to see out there, but I don't really have a project going for a sort of fully ambient electronic or just ambient electroacoustic sort of artist. So that's something I could potentially see coming out in the near future. Now, one of the tracks from that collection did actually get developed and sort of released out to the world. I worked with an artist to score an art installation at a museum, and the jumping off point for that project was one of these daily Jamuary pieces. I added quite a lot to that and sort of brought it more in line with the neoclassical experimental work I'm doing under Tumsun. So it'd be cool to see that reworked one mixed in with some of these more raw, maybe live performances that I captured during Jamuary. I really have been thinking about these tracks as jumping off points as I start new projects. There have been some opportunities in the past where I've taken some of these tracks and developed them further, sped them up, added things, and then pitched those as options. So yeah, even if they don't end up released as they were when I finished Jamuary, I'm really glad that I went through that process and walked away with this body of work. I'll be the first to admit that I don't really consider this finished work, but I think it's a great head start in the creative process. And more than anything, I think Jamuary or any of these monthly creative challenges, I think of them as exercise. Making is a muscle. I think anyone who makes anything, whether it's music, visual art, writing, coding, woodworking, cooking, textiles, whatever, whoever you are and whatever you make, I think you'll agree that when you're out of practice, making is that much harder. So I think a timed creative challenge like Jamuary is just an opportunity to exercise that muscle. Whether you walk away with a finished body of work or not, there's just a big benefit to putting in that time every day. There's also a big cost. I was pretty stressed when I was doing Jamuary. I know I was the only person holding myself to that commitment, producing a new track every day, but still I was stressed at just the thought of failing this challenge, and that did motivate me to finish in the end. Now, you might not be the type of person who responds to that type of motivation, and so a challenge like this really might not be for you. It might completely kill off any creativity you might have or joy you have in the process, and that's okay. Don't feel like you need to do this. But as I mentioned before, for me, I'm somebody who is motivated by deadlines, who does sort of work down to the wire, and sometimes that's my best work. So this was the perfect project for that time in my life. I also want to draw some comparisons between my experience in February album writing month and Jamuary. The first one, February album writing month, felt like it was happening more in a vacuum compared to Jamuary. No one was really checking in. No one was sharing their demos. I guess the platform to do that back in 2010 or 2011 would have been Facebook. And I just wasn't part of any groups or anything like that. Comparatively, in 2022, Jamuary actually had some kind of cool support. Cuckoo, the YouTuber and musician, was sharing weekly challenges and was soliciting people to submit to those challenges, and then he would select those and feature those, and actually a couple of mine made it onto his selections. So yeah, there was a lot of positive feedback happening during that time in that process, and that was definitely motivating when I was making those tracks. So yeah, that's been my experience with Jamuary. I wouldn't exactly say it's a sustainable way to make music, but if you have the time and you're looking to maybe jumpstart your creative practice, I'd recommend it. Let me know in the comments if you've done Jamuary in the past or any of these monthly creative challenges, and if there were things that you did or didn't like about it. And let me know if you have any thoughts on the 4 releases I talked about. Hopefully I'll have something to share here in 2025, so keep your ear to the ground. Like and subscribe if you want more videos like this, and thanks as always for watching.